Our scripture reading for today's teaching comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, 'And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
We've been going through this last couple of weeks, all the way up to Christmas, through Matthew's Gospel, to sort of look at the significance of Christmas, the significance of Christ coming, his birth around Christmas. And what Matthew's Gospel does is it doesn't so much sort of narrate the details of how Jesus was born and the circumstances around it, as much as it gives us actually the events that describe the meaning of Jesus' birth. So we saw his family genealogy, and how his mother, Mary, is sort of the product of that, and is sort of a scandalous birth. And then we saw how his father, Joseph, is not even allowed to name his own child. But this week we get to the wise men, a very famous story that also they're called here in the text, the Magi. Now, what do we get with the Magi? Well, I didn't get it to Tracy in time, but it was read for you in verse 12, that it says that after they saw the child, they learned in a dream to not return to Herod, and they went back another way. Now, another way in the New Testament is actually a very loaded, pregnant term, because the early Christians, the early church, when they talked about what it meant to be a Christian, it was just described as the way. So what we're given here with the Magi is after they see the child, their life changes. And right then and there, you sort of get a picture of what is the meaning of Jesus' birth supposed to give us. It's supposed to give you a life changed. Because if you see and experience this child at Christmas, it's not just meant to be warm fuzzies. It's not meant to be just inspiration. It's meant to give you a reality and an experience so you go back into your life in a totally different way. And here's how it can come to you. Here's how you can have a life-changing experience the explosion of Christmas to go back in your life in a different way. It's through four things, let's notice in the text. 1, the search of the Magi. 2, the concern of Herod. 3, the providence of God. And 4, the wonder of the child. 4 things that are right there in the text. So number 1, the search of the Magi. So at first glance, whenever you think about a spiritual experience, we kind of stereotypically imagine this and think of it to be this thing that you can't really explain what happened. I just kind of closed my eyes. Something happened to me. I can't really describe it or reproduce it, but it was life-changing. But that's not what happens to the Magi here at all. If you notice what it says back in verse 2, it says they saw the star. Now, there's several Greek words for the word see and to saw, and when it says that plural, they saw. The typical word would be blepo. That's like to visually see and observe something. But that's not the word Matthew uses here. The word he uses means to perceive or to see with your mind. And then in verse 8, when Herod tells them to go search and to look for the child, he gives them this, Matthew uses the word etazo. It literally means to examine circumstances and to test thoroughly. And so what the Magi are given is they're told to go look into these things. It would have been known at that time that any sort of mysterious astrology moment probably signified the birth of some king somewhere. And then there's a rumor going around from the prophecy of Micah that any time now this Messiah is going to be born sort of in this sort of general region. So they have this evidence. They have these rumors going around. And they don't just go, well, let's just close our eyes and believe. They go to investigate it. They go to look into it. They go to take out the evidence, and they want to unpack it. Now, why do I bring that up? Because, like I just said a few minutes ago, most people who don't know what to do with Christianity and don't know what to do with a sort of Christmas, imagine an experience at Christmas to be something where you suspend your mind, you suspend information, you suspend rationality, and you just have to have faith. You just got to close your eyes and believe. Because mostly what we imagine about secular belief is that, well, this has got evidence, this has got concrete realities, this has got things that make sense and unpack my life. But when you get into things that are spiritual, we have to just get rid of that altogether and just hope it's true. But again, that's not what the wise men do at all. In fact, what the wise men tell us is that the way to find the child is to go look into it. See, they went looking into information. They went looking into rumors. They went looking into things that they had heard through society. And they went looking for actually a new Caesar and found the Son of God. And they didn't find it by closing our eyes. They found it by investigating it. I'll give you an example of this. Jordan, forgive me her French last name, Minaj. She was a Harvard student who, like I said, she was militant atheist, was her sort of self-described story. And she went to Harvard and would, late at night in her dorm room, love to stay up late at night and debate people who called themselves Christians. She said she would love to give them questions she knew they couldn't answer, try to poke holes in their arguments, and she just thrived on this her freshman and sophomore year. But her own sort of personal story is that as she would ask questions and people gave her some thoughtful answers, she began to doubt her doubts. And as she began to doubt her doubts, she began to sort of read the Bible. And as she read the Bible in her own story, she said she suddenly began to realize, I'm not a very loving person. And I'm actually quite selfish. And I'm actually quite interested in only the things that I care about and I need to happen in life. But the problem for her, as she began to be sort of drawn and convicted by this, she felt like the evidence wasn't legit. And so she wanted to do is to sort of dive in, and she wanted to investigate it. And here's how she describes her story. She said, I longed for the Bible to be true, but the intellectual evidence was still insufficient. So I plunged headlong into apologetics, devouring debates and books from many perspectives. I read the Quran. I read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. I went through the Skeptic's Annotated Bible and looked up Christians' rebuttals to apparent contradictions. But nothing compared to the rich words and tradition I found of Christian intellect. I'd argued with my peers, but I'd never investigated the works of the masters like Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, Descartes, Kant, Pascal, and C.S. Lewis. When I finally did, the only reasonable course of action was to believe in the Son of God. I committed my life to Christ by being baptized on Easter Sunday, 2009. But never once did I have to sacrifice my intellect for my faith. When confronted with the overwhelming body of evidence I encountered, when facing down the living God, it was the only rational course of action. And hear this. She said, I came to Harvard seeking veritas, the Latin word for truth. And instead, Veritas found me. Now, what we're being given here is that the way into the explosion of Christmas is not just to close your eyes and hope it's true. It's to dive in and to look and to see the rich reality that these wise men found in that little home. And they saw something that compelled their life. Now, what did they see? Well, we don't actually really even know. But there is something you can see. And here's something to sort of compel you to look into. And it's right here in the text. If you study early church history, one of the great threats to the church and the great threats to faith were astrologists. Were people who believed in the stars and looked into the stars as a way of making sense of life and identity and purpose. And do you know who the Magi were? I mean, we call them the three wise men. They were astrologists and philosophers. And so what Matthew is doing here is he's saying, look, one of the greatest threats, one of the things that the church has to fight against in order for us to believe and make Jesus plausible, they were actually the first witnesses of the birth of Christ. Now, as Francis Schaeffer says, why in the world would you put that as a part of the testimony of the Son of God, that the people who were arguing against the most were the ones to say it's actually him, unless it actually happened? Because when you look into it, you say, there's no reason to put that there. There's no reason for that to happen unless it actually happened. And if you begin to look in that, have you looked into that in order to get the explosion in the life-changing encounter at Christmas? Secondly, though, we need to see the concern of Herod. So as this rumor is going around, these magi come to town, and they begin asking questions about the Son of God being in Jerusalem. And what you notice is that nobody casually responds to that. I'll set it up this way. One minister I heard talk about this passage, he gave this sort of metaphor. If I come to your house and I walk in and I just say, do you have a shotgun? Whether you say yes or no, you're going to have a follow-up question. Why are you asking for a shotgun? Why? And you know why? Because the significance of the question cannot let you go, yeah, it's in the closet. It begs the profound response to go, wait, what's going on here? And when the Magi come in asking if the Son of God is born in this town, nobody has this reaction across the entire story of apathy. Now, you and I can hear these Christmas stories and hear these Christmas songs and almost be inoculated with the realities of Christmas, but anybody who was around it had no such reaction. I mean, here's Herod's reaction, we're told in verse 3, is that he learns about what is happening and he's very troubled. Another word for that could be that he was very anxious. And the reason he's anxious is because when he hears the birth of the promised Messiah, this is not just another king in another region. He doesn't hear this and imagine, well, that's good for them. Or, oh, that religion always wanted that to happen. He hears it as a threat. Now, why? Here's why. Because Herod had built his whole life, his whole sense of meaning, his whole sense of purpose on his power and control. He'd been known as this great, ruler, this great king, and he realizes the birth of this child is not just another idea. It is not just another thing in our society. It's going to be a threat to his society. And anything that comes to threaten the power and control of someone like myself who's the king, there's no room for them. They've got to go. I mean, it's a bit like, do you remember the first Toy Story movie? With Tom Hanks playing, Woody, who's the beloved child or the beloved toy of his child Andy, and Andy takes Woody everywhere, and they're just best friends. And his whole sense of purpose and meaning is like being best friends with Andy. It's his entire identity until Andy has a birthday party and gets Buzz Lightyear, and all of a sudden the Woody posters come down, and the Buzz Lightyear ones come up. The Woody blanket goes away, and the Buzz Lightyear blanket is on the bed. And then all of a sudden he takes his seat on the bed. And what does Tom Hanks's character Woody decide after that? Buzz has got to go. It's because anytime something comes in your life and threatens who you are, it threatens the essence of what makes you, you can't casually, apathetically walk past it and say, well, I'll deal with it later. It is at the height of your life, and you basically have one reaction. Either you change or that's got to go. See, everybody has got something that makes you you. It makes you liked. It makes you loved. It makes you feel confident. It makes you have self-awareness. It makes you have, success in life. And whatever that thing is, you will do anything you can to protect it. And almost you can't know what it is until it's threatened. But what Christmas has got to do is come in and say, look, anything that's in the center of your life that's more significant and tells you who you are, more than that child in that woman's arms, has got to go. And one of the ways you're hearing the call of Christmas to do that is that you feel it as a concern, as a threat. I'll give you one example that applies to a lot of you in this room, and that's your children. And the reason it's helpful to talk about your children is because we almost never know how important they are until they're threatened. But one of the problems is that most people don't know how to love their children because we worship our children. That is, we take our children and we don't just say, I love them. We make them the essence of our significance. We put them at the forefront of our life and say, my happiness, my sense of worth, my sense of being known and being a significant person in this world will revolve around our children. But the problem with that is if you make your children the center of your life and worship them, you'll never be able to love them. Because on the one hand, you'll never be able to celebrate them. See, if your children are the center of your life, you can't celebrate them because anytime they do something that's not perfect or incredible or better than everybody else, you'll have a hard time championing that because you'll feel like you're just kind of enabling them. You're coming down to the lower levels and giving them the participation award and making them feel like mediocrity is okay. But if you do that, your children will always, always wonder if they're loved and significant. But on the other hand, if you worship your children, not only will you not be able to celebrate them, you won't be able to criticize them. Because their happiness, their sense of comfort, their sense of stillness, their sense of peace in life depends on your peace, your happiness, your stillness, your calmness in life. And that means whenever they screw up, whenever they're living out dysfunctionality in life, whenever there's something is troubling in their life, you'll have a hard time pressing in and criticizing them for it because you don't want them to be upset. Because you don't want them to be worried. You don't want them to be troubled. You don't want them to be bothered in life. And all the while, it feels like it's love, but it's worship. And you know what your children really need? What they need is somebody who can celebrate them and somebody who can criticize them. Somebody who can give them grace and truth. But you will never, ever, ever be able to do that until you get them off the throne of your life and put that child on the throne of your life. And you worship him. But the only way, especially with something like your children, that you're even beginning to think about doing that is if it feels like a threat. Because the moment something even like Christmas comes to threaten your children, it feels like Herod. It's like, well, that has got to go. Because there's no way I'm getting rid of that. But Christmas calls even the things that we swear are good and admirable in life have got to be every heart must prepare ye room for this child. The life-changing experience. Look, the search of the Magi. Secondly, the concern of Herod. But third, the providence of God. Okay, so these Magi, here's what we're told about them. It says in verse 1 that they saw a star and they come searching in Jerusalem for this child. They follow it into this great city of Jerusalem and are asking questions around. Now, I mentioned this about Magi, but they were astronomers, philosophers of the day. And what they did is they looked at stars and constellations and significant things happening in the skies and said, this will give us meaning and significance in life. This will tell us from the gods about who we are as people and what the purpose of life is. So they're using astrology. And then the reason they go into Jerusalem is because they're using the common sense philosophy of the day. If there's going to be a king, if there's going to be anybody important in life, he's going to be born in the big, significant city of Jerusalem. Like he's going to be born in New York or London or LA, not in some rural town in Nebraska. But what they're told there is when they get out the prophet Micah, it says actually he's going to be born in Bethlehem. So they're using astronomy, the common sense of the day, and then they go look for the child because Herod, the king, says, go spy on this child because I'm not sure he can stay. Now, follow the Magi up to here. They're using astronomy, sort of the structure of, evolution, like the strong survive, the weak things don't matter, that paradigm. And they're spying for a king who wants to murder children. And they end up in the presence of Jesus. And that's how God converts the Magi. Now, here's the point. These people were in no way looking for the Son of God. These people weren't saying, hey, do you guys ever wonder if there really is a Messiah and we should go find him? Nor were they sitting around going, do you feel guilty about how you're living your life? Maybe we should go. They went living on human paradigms, the secular things of the day, and God used all of that to bring them into the life-changing moment of Christmas. See, in order to have your life changed, you actually don't even need to be searching for the things that you should be searching for. You don't even have to be asking the right questions. You don't even have to be longing for the right things. You just have to be open. You just got to be willing, because almost always we go after something that we don't even know we're chasing, and God uses that to bring us to himself. I'll give you an example of this. There's a minister right now who's doing ministry on a college campus in San Jose, California. And he got into ministry because during his college career, he had been sort of looking into Christianity and came to a conference in Panama City Beach, Florida, and heard the gospel in such a powerful way. He says he literally went out to the beach and just gave his life to Christ. His life totally changed. He'd grown up agnostic, atheist his whole life. And that had happened after like a year of looking into faith. And he'd looked in it through this ministry I was a part of. But do you know how he found him? Because his freshman year, right away, he met a cute girl across the hall and thought she was hot and wanted to go wherever she went. And she said, well, I'm going to this group in this Bible study. You should come. And he was like, whatever, just to be around you. And that's how he got into ministry. Look, there's a lot of people who are in this city that don't really know what they should be looking for. They just know where they're standing is not enough. And you never need to correct why they're looking into what they're looking for, or that they have the right reasons. Because what God works with, it's as if he says, it doesn't matter why you come. All that matters is what you come to, which is meeting the real Jesus in that woman's arms. It's as if God looked at the Magi and said, while you're staring at the stars, I'm going to introduce you to the North Star, the true star of the world that will actually change your life. Now, here's how I want you to apply this going forward. Because the response we all need from this kind of care and providence from God is just in life to be curious. is just to open yourself, whether you're somebody who doesn't know what to do with Christmas, or you're somebody who longs for your friend to begin to know what to do with Christmas, you have just got to be curious. David Brooks, New York Times author, wrote a book last year that my friend Matt Trexler was telling me about called How to Know People. And in it, he basically says, okay, I've sort of interacted with kind of two types of people. There's illuminators and there's diminishers. He says illuminators are people who they just bring life to you. They open you up to new things. They change you. They encourage you. They help you in suffering. They walk with you in the most hard things in life, and they build deep and lasting friendships with you. And the reason they do is because they always come to you humbly. They always come not knowing everything. They always come like they're not the one who's got the answers and all the information, and you just need to sit down and listen to them. They're people who are curious about you. They're curious about life. They're curious about the meaningful things of life. They're curious about introducing you and what you have questions about to the meaningful things of life. But he says, on the other hand, you'll meet people who are diminishers. He says, diminishers like suck life out of you because you walk into them and they just know everything already. They've got all the answers. There's no questions. They're never interested in learning anything new in life or knew anything about you. And they're closed off to all new kinds of possibilities. And David Brooks says almost right away, you can tell the difference between these types of people. And one will take you into the light. And he says the other, it almost is always a constant experience of darkness. I'll give you a picture of this. I mean, if you watched the TV show Ted Lasso, there's a great interaction, by Jason Sudeikis' character, Ted Lasso, when he meets the former owner of the team that hired him, the guy Rupert, who just mocks him and makes fun of him and thinks he's a fool. And he realizes this guy is so cynical. And as he's talking to him, here's what he says. He says, all the fellas that used to belittle me, he goes, here's what I realized. Not a single one of them were curious. They thought they had everything all figured out. So they judged everything and everyone. And I realized that they were underestimating me. Who I was had nothing to do with it. Because if they were curious, they could have asked questions and introduced something pretty cool. Look, right now, this morning, Christmas has something brand new and explosive for you. That you can go back out of this room a different way into your own life. And all you need right now, you don't need the right questions. You don't need the right answers. You don't need a watertight solution to any of this. You just need the curiosity for Christmas. Here's how you have a life-changing experience. One, you've got to realize the search of the Magi. They investigated. Two, you got to open yourself, be honest about the concern of Herod, that there's things in our life that have to get off the throne that we don't want to let go of. Third, you just open yourself up to that providence of God. But fourth, lastly, you got to see the wonder of this baby. So we're told in verse 10 that the Magi, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly. They were overwhelmed. And then they go into this house in verse 11, and it says they see this baby. We don't actually know how old Jesus is in this story. They see him, and they fall down and worship him. Now, think about this moment. The Magi were what we think from Babylon. So it says they're from the east. These are not Jews who had longed for the Messiah, had read all the Old Testament scriptures, were just waiting on, finally something coming. And it finally came. No. They had no idea. They were the smartest people in their culture. They were the most thoughtful people in their culture. Kings would bring them in to consult them for wisdom. But they walk in this room, and it's like they see a wisdom from another world. And they bow down and worship him. It says that they take expensive gifts. They take their most prized things and they just present them. And they don't present them as atonement or appeasement to get something else. They just lay him down at his feet as if giving this to this child is the end in itself. It is the experience. C.S. Lewis says in his reflection on the Psalms, praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. And here's what you're seeing. The experience that's required for change happens in worship. Is when you see something to adore, when you see something to treasure, and it's not so that it gives you something else. It's not so that it can bring you in a different place in life. It's to worship and adore it just because it's worthy of that. And giving love and giving celebration to that is the end in itself. Now, some of you may hear that and go, well, first century people were just kind of open to these kinds of things. Well, I mean, do you remember when Justin Bieber was like 12 years old and would get out of a car and all you grown women would just like scream bloody murder and the cops would have to keep you 10 yards away? I mean, there's something about us that wants to look at somebody in something and scream and celebrate and lay down, but with almost everybody, and even sweet Justin Bieber. It's like John Paul Sartre says, even of Shakespeare, even of Beethoven, we eventually look into them and say, is that all? Is this it? But not with these wise men. And here's how we know. Here's how we know it wasn't just for a moment. Because it says in verse 12, they're told to go back a different way. And you know why they're told to go back a different way? Because if they go back to Herod, they're going to realize that their new love of their life is going to cost them their life. And here's how you know you have a love and a worship and a celebration of something that is not just like a moment at a concert. You adore something and you worship something and you celebrate something if it's worth your life. If something that comes after your life, you say you can take it because you can take everything but me, but you can't take the one thing that is my life. Because him as my life is worth even my own life. And see, when you're willing to lay everything down and give it up, because it's for him and it's to know him. Look, that is the freest experience, and that's when Christmas is beginning to change your life and set you back in a totally new way, because you can live with the freedom and the joy and the experience that nothing can come after my life, because he is my life and worth everything that was my life. Now, how do you do that? How do you get the power to do that? Well, Matthew kind of gives us a hint in the text. So when it tells us that Herod wanted to go look into the child, it's because he's going to kill every child that may be a threat to him. And then we didn't read this, but the next couple of verses after that says they fled to Egypt, and they were in Egypt for a little while, and then they had to come out and leave. And Matthew's trying to get us all to think about something. He's trying to get you to think about the Exodus. And what happened in the Exodus is God's people had been taken into slavery. They'd been ruled by Pharaoh. Their lives were miserable. They were stuck. They were lost. They had no life. And God comes in and says, I will be your life, and I will deliver you from all of this slavery, and I will deliver you from Pharaoh. And he's saying that probably what those magi learned is they said, this child is going to give us a new Exodus, but it's not going to be an Exodus from Pharaoh. It's going to be an exodus from sin and death, from the greatest curses of this world, from the things that bind us in and would ruin Christmas forever. Basically, you can give up your life because you begin to see that this child will give up his life for you. And it will be the deliverance, not from something just this week, but from something eternal. From the curse of death, from the curse of the things that suck life and make us diminishers in life and so cynical and cut off to all the hopes of this world. He came to relieve all of it. And if you will just look at that and stare in that and open yourself and get curious for that, that will give you the freedom, the power to realize this child is a gift. And if you worship him, he'll be the one thing that if you don't love him enough, he'll always forgive you. And if you throw yourself into him, there's nothing this world can take from you. And when you know him and you taste him, it becomes a thrill of hope. Alistair Begg, when he's preaching on this sermon, on this text, he said so well, he said, these three wise men, they came in with the treasures of earth in their hands, but they left with the treasure of heaven in their heart. Go and do the same. Let me pray. Father, this Christmas, in fresh new ways, Lord, would you give us a thrill of hope? As we may be personally a weary world that could find rejoicing in you. Lord, help us to be able to go back in our life in a new way because of the wonder and the majesty of that child. Show him to us in a personal, fresh way. In Jesus' name, amen.